Hello and welcome to episode 2 for November 2024 of the BV Magazine podcast, your deep dive into the world of rural Dorset life. Hello from me, Terry Bennett.
And hello from me, Jenny Devitt.
And in this episode, Rachel Rogers from Citizens Advice offers an insight into current scams, which we all need to be on the lookout for.
Fanny Charles gives us an update on the latest in the ongoing saga of what to do about possible landslips in the ancient Holloway of Dinah's Hollow and the very heavy through traffic in the North Dorset village of Melbury Abbas just below it.
And I speak to Buffy Wareham, practice nurse at the Blandford Group of Surgeries, about her 50 years in nursing, with over half of that based at the same surgery. All of us are aware of the increasing prevalence of scams and other fraud, particularly in the virtual online world. But what can we do to safeguard ourselves from these unscrupulous individuals who are becoming ever more ingenious in the methods they employ? Rachel Rogers from Citizens Advice offers some great insight and some useful tips. Today I'm with Rachel Rogers down in the Citizens Advice area of Weymouth Library. Rachel, you are the service manager for Citizens Advice for Dorset, presumably, are you?
No, I'm the service advice manager for Weymouth and Portland, Terry. Weymouth and Portland Citizens Advice is part of Central Dorset Citizens Advice, and that stretches basically from Portland Bill up to Sturminster Newton, goes through Weymouth, Dorchester, Sherborne, over to Blandford, up to Gillingham. So it's a big swathe of Central Dorset.
And the Citizens Advice, I mean, most people will know roughly what you do. We're here today to talk about the article which you wrote for the BV magazine about scams, and I guess that encompasses fraud more generally. Is that a big area of activity for you?
Well, yes, Terry. I mean, we're seeing more and more people coming to us who been scammed or who are worried about being scammed or who can tell us about somebody else in their family or their friend circle that's been scammed. These scams are getting more prevalent, but they're also getting more sophisticated, and so more and more people are falling foul of them or worrying about them.
And no scruples here at all, are there? I mean, the more vulnerable you are, the more likely, I suppose, you are to be scammed.
I suppose that's true, but I think also that's a good way of people thinking that they're invulnerable to scams, when actually none of us is invulnerable to a scam. And we see clients who come in who've been scammed or who've spotted scams who you would never expect to fall foul of it. And indeed, the other day I was talking to a lady whose job it is to go out and talk to people about scams, and she herself said that she'd very nearly fallen foul of a scam. And if somebody whose job it is to do that is falling foul of things, you can see how sophisticated these problems are.
Okay, so we're all at risk. What is the role of Citizens Advice when it comes to this? Presumably to guide people through the process of reporting and trying to get back their money. Is that a fair summary?
Well, I think the first thing that the role of Citizens Advice is actually to alert people to the fact that scams exist, to try to make people aware of the kinds of scams that they might fall prey to, the way in which scammers might approach them, the things to look out for. We try to be proactive and preventative in our approach. It's only if somebody's fallen foul of a scam that then we need to start talking to them about what to do next and how to protect yourself in future.
Prevention is better than cure, as they say.
Absolutely.
Now, the article which you have written for the BV magazine neatly and very succinctly outlines really 6 types of scam. I wonder if we can just run through those briefly. The first one is investment scams. Just tell us a little bit about that.
This year, there's a national week called Scams Awareness Week, and this year's Scams Awareness Week focused on what you said, 6 types of financial scams. And the first of those is an investment scam. So scammers often use fake celebrity endorsements to try to make their offer seem more legitimate or more attractive. You need to be really careful because at the end of the day, these celebrities probably haven't used the investment at all. The investment and the endorsement is part of the scam.
Okay, so be on the lookout for that. Friend in need is another one. Probably some of us have seen this in social media where somebody gets in contact with maybe a relative or a son or a daughter or a friend saying that they need cash urgently. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly that. And normally it comes from somebody who says, I've lost my phone. This is your son. This is your grandson. I've lost my phone. I need cash urgently. Send it to me. Obviously, this is going to be a scam, but obviously people are worried. If they think it really is their son or their grandson or their granddaughter who's in trouble, their initial reaction is to go, I need to send the money. Don't do that. Don't be rushed. Before you respond to that kind of message, call that family member or call somebody else who's likely to know that family member first to check that it really is them and to confirm the request. It's very unlikely that somebody is going to be texting you or mailing you from a stranger's phone or from a new phone. So ring the number that you know for them, or call the number that you know for them to make sure that it is actually them that sent you that request. So don't be responding to those things. I think the thing that we can say about scammers generally is that they try to pressurise you. They try to make you think that the situation is urgent. They try to pretend that the offer they've got for you is only going to last for another half an hour. And if you don't jump now, you're going to miss out on an opportunity. And that's what makes people fall into the trap.
And there was an interesting suggestion in the article to set up a password so that in that sort of circumstance where you genuinely might be in an emergency, you could use the password to convince your friends, relatives that actually it was genuinely you.
Absolutely, and that's a great idea, isn't it? To have some kind of a safe word. So instead of getting a text that goes, oh, it's your grandson, you get a text that says, I know, banana or marigold or something like that. So actually an unusual kind of word that only somebody in your close circle would recognise. Then you can always say to this person, well, tell me what the safe word is. And if they don't know what the safe word is, well, it's definitely not them, is it?
Romance scams is the next one. Tell us all about that. Do we need some soft music here?
Absolutely not. I think romance scams is one of the most difficult scams, partly because it's one of the most difficult scams for people to admit to. A romance scam is basically where somebody has formed an emotional attachment to the scammer. And that's generally done through social media or through some kind of distance relationship. So, if you're being asked for money by somebody who you think you've developed an online relationship with, but they're refusing to meet you or they refuse to see you, you want to be really, really suspicious about that. Oh, this is your boyfriend. We've been talking for 6 months and suddenly my grandma's fallen ill and I need £10,000, send it to me urgently. You just need to be so sure. It's very unlikely this is going to happen if you've never met this person, if you don't know them in real life. It's unlikely to be a very tall, dark, handsome man who lives in Scotland. It's much more likely to be somebody who's working on a keyboard in, another part of the world, who's just basically been manipulating your emotions with the end point of getting some money out of you. And it's so difficult for people to admit to the fact that they've been emotionally abused in this way, because it is emotional abuse. I find this the most difficult thing to talk to people about, because we're not just talking about your bank account. We're not just talking about the fact that it feels like you've been robbed. It's also like the fact that you've actually been emotionally manipulated, which you have. You've been emotionally manipulated, and it's a terrible thing to happen. And obviously people find it hard to admit, not just to other people, but also to themselves, that the emotions that they were feeling weren't in fact genuine emotions. Well, the emotions they were feeling were genuine, but the emotions that they were responding to weren't genuine, and actually the aim of the game was to try to fleece you.
And again, I suspect that the fraudsters prey upon people who are emotionally vulnerable as well, that maybe are in a difficult place in life at that particular moment.
Absolutely, emotionally vulnerable and also isolated. So this is the kind of thing, really, if you couldn't tell a close friend or a family member about this relationship, if they're saying it's a secret relationship, these should set your alarm bells ringing. If you can't tell your daughter, your next door neighbour, your friend about this relationship that you're having, then it's probably not a real relationship. There's probably something about it that's abusive or manipulative. And if they're saying, oh no, keep it secret, well, of course they're saying keep it secret because they want to take all your money. So people need to look at these things in a very sort of cold, clear way. But I'm saying that, but I know it's not as easy as it sounds. So I think the advice here is for other people to say, if you think that somebody that you know or that you care about might be in some kind of online or remote emotionally manipulative relationship, have the courage to talk to them about it, because you might be able to prevent something really terrible from happening.
Okay, moving on. The next one is pension scams. I didn't know anything about this one. Tell us about that.
Pension scams. Well, apparently there's two different types of pension scams. These are slightly rarer. One is basically about somebody saying, I'm going to help you review your pension options. And the other one is somebody offering to do pension early release for you. I think the thing to remember about pension scams is if anybody's offering you free pension advice, it's pretty much certainly going to be a scam, because no pension advice is ever free.
Rather the contrary, it's quite expensive, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, but I think it's another case of these things where, you get what you pay for, and if you're paying for your pension advice, hopefully you're going to be getting good pension advice, and if you're not paying for it, well, you're probably going to lose your money.
Which leads us neatly on to number 5, which is debt help on social media. How does that work?
Well, it doesn't. Basically, anybody who's trying to offer you debt help, and actually for that matter, benefit help on social media, some people are using, celebrities or financial influencers to try to promote debt solutions in a misleading way. Or sometimes they give you inaccurate advice. Sometimes they cost lots of money. Sometimes they'll put your finances at risk. There is free debt advice out there. Make sure that you are accessing a free debt advice charity. You can access the Citizens Advice Debt Helpline, or there are organisations like Step Change or National Debtline. These are proper debt charities that are not going to scam you. Just try not to fall foul for things that are being endorsed.
Okay, and the final one on your list is parking QR codes. Now, this is a relatively recent innovation, I would guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Modern and quite innovative, I have to say, but also quite easy to fall foul of. So these are the kinds of things where if you're parking your car in a car park and there's a QR code, one of those little boxes with the dots in, and you're supposed to scan the code with your phone and it will, take you to the right place to pay the money, that scammers are putting other QR codes on top of those existing QR codes so that when you scan it, you think you're going to the right place to pay your parking fee, but actually you're going to their bank account, and their scamming bank account, and you're paying them the money. So there's two problems here. One is that you're giving money to a scammer, and the other is that you're not actually paying your parking fee, so you're going to end up coming back and there's going to be a great big ticket on your windscreen. So, be really careful if you're paying to park online. We would recommend that you actually download the app for the kind of car park that you're using, and you only ever pay through the app.
Or indeed the machine, although there's a decreasing number of those, isn't there?
If you're trying to get a machine that takes, pounds, shillings and pence, you might be struggling a bit.
Okay, that's the 6 in the article, but stop press, there's a new one, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a new one, and this is a bit insidious, because what we've seen rising up recently, really in the last sort of month, is a scam that's going around, which is basically a text scam where people are getting texts purporting to be from the government offering help for winter fuel subsidies. The government does not text people and offer them money. You probably do not need me to tell you this. If you get a text on your phone purporting to be from the government saying it's a winter fuel subsidy, click on this link, you only have to be a British citizen or something like that, do not click on the link. It is a scam.
And again, preying on those who are in a vulnerable position, having lost that subsidy.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we're aware of the fact that that's come from the fact that the government has means tested the winter fuel allowance. There is money out there to help people who are struggling to pay their energy bills this winter. There is some particular help for people who are just missing the pension credit threshold and yet are in fuel poverty. So if you do think you need some extra help to pay your fuel bills this winter, we would urge you to contact your local Citizens Advice.
Okay, some great advice there. But if the worst happens and you do find that you have fallen foul and you've been a victim of fraud, what should you do?
Well, if it's about money in your bank account, you should contact your bank straight away. The quicker you contact your bank, the more likely it is that you'll get your money back. So that's thing number one. Try not to be embarrassed about it. Just be upfront and say, this has happened, I've been scammed, this is who I've given the money to, this is how much I've lost. And most banks will be really helpful and will try to get the money back if they can. What you can't get the money back from is if you have physically gone to a cash point and taken the money out and paid a scammer face-to-face, you will not get the money back for that. Unfortunately, we're only really talking about scams that are happening online or remotely. The second thing is you should report the scam. So you can report the scam to Action Fraud, or you can come in and talk to somebody at Citizens Advice and we can report the scam for you to the Consumer Helpline, or you can report the scam yourself to the Consumer Helpline.
All right, that's great stuff. Thank you very much for that. And just while we've got you, Rachel, what else is live at the moment? What sort of things are coming across your desk right now, apart from scams and fraud?
The biggest, most mass issue that's coming across our desk at the moment is people applying for the Household Support Fund. Household Support Fund's been running for a couple of years now. We're in round 6. Round 6 is started at the beginning of November and it's going to run until the end of March. That's basically a supermarket voucher of £150 for households that are claiming means-tested benefits, so universal credit, working tax credits, housing benefit, pension credit, council tax support. So if one of your listeners claims one of those benefits and hasn't got their HSF6 voucher yet, they might want to give their local Citizens Advice a ring or send them an email.
Okay, Rachel, thank you very much for talking to us. We'll keep in touch because it's always very valuable advice that you give, and it's always relevant and up to the minute with things that are going on the ground, so to speak. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Terry.
My thanks again to Rachel Rogers for that useful advice. And the consumer helpline run by Citizens Advice, to which she referred, is 0808 223 1133.
In last month's BV magazine, Fanny Charles gave us an update on what's happening with that big bone of contention that is Dinah's Hollow, a deep, ancient holloway on the C13 to the north of the village of Melbury Abbas. Frequent heavy traffic through the holloway and the village is a source of ongoing problems, and Dorset Council is committed to taking action of some sort in answer to concerns that the section of the road that goes through Dinah's Hollow is unsafe.
Dinah's Hollow's misfortune is to be on the C13. And the C13 is the road that links Shaftesbury and Blandford, as does the A350. Neither of them are good roads. The A350, unfortunately, is designated by the powers that be in their infinite wisdom as the main road from the port of Poole to the motorway system. And although, as the chairman of Melbury Abbas and Cann Parish Council pointed out to me, once you cross the county boundary, the road in Wiltshire, apart from poor Westbury, the road in Wiltshire is pretty good, but the A350 south of the county boundary veers from being a twisty lane to being a very narrow road through villages where anything more than 20 miles an hour would probably be dangerous. But at least the bits through Charlton, Marshall and Spetsbury are relatively straight.
Well, I suppose we're Fanny, with the benefit of wonderful benefit of hindsight, one could wonder why you would even contemplate running what was going to be a main road carrying lots of traffic through something like that, like through an ancient holloway.
Well, the problem is that when you get north of Blandford, you go through a series of bends. They're known as the Steepleton Bends, and they are tight bends. They're not like going up zigzag, but they are tight bends. So they're not great for heavy traffic. And if heavy traffic meets going in two directions on the Steepleton Bends, it's quite difficult. The people who live in the A350 villages, so that's Cann and Fontmell Magna, Compton Abbas and Ewan Minster, the other villages are slightly off the road, they understandably do not want quite the volume of heavy traffic they get. So over time, despite various campaigns to try to keep heavy traffic off the C13, the old county council came up with the idea of a voluntary one-way system. And, you know, the mind boggles at the idea of a voluntary one-way system for HGVs on the 350 and southbound traffic on the C13, northbound traffic on the A350. And the thing is that when you get to the top of Spread Eagle on the C13, you then have a very good, more or less straight road all the way to Blandford Bypass. So the quarry lorries, for instance, that come down from the Mendips, they ignore the voluntary one-way system and they use the C13 both ways, including Dinah's Hollow. So that is the situation, that Dinah's Hollow carries a ludicrous amount of very heavy traffic. If you meet a quarry lorry going the right way, and you are in an ordinary car, there are 2 or 3 places going through Melbury Abbas where you can barely pass. But Dinah's Hollow is an ancient holloway. They were created by thousands, certainly hundreds of years of human feet, oxen hooves, horses' hooves, cart trucks, you name it, over time in the particular geology that we have in this area. And obviously around Shaftesbury, particularly sandstone. I mean, East Coker in Somerset is another example. Loads of holloways. I think there are 7 around Shaftesbury. The other very well-known one is called the Hollow, and that goes from Shaftesbury down to Morecambe. But it doesn't carry the volume of traffic. There was a time when Dinah's Hollow was actually closed, which in many ways was nice, although it was very difficult for Melbury Abbas villagers. Then they came up with a one-way system. In 2012, there was a tragic accident at Beminster when a couple had been out for dinner. There was a ghastly collapse of the railway embankment by the Beminster Tunnel. The poor people were buried alive and not even found for days. It was a genuine tragedy and a genuine accident, and if there were faults, they have been, fingers have been pointed in terms of what may or may not have happened to the embankment. But the geology is very different from the geology around Shaftesbury. However, the District County Council, now just the council, is pursuing the idea that Dinah's Hollow is dangerous. And they want to do something that they call stabilisation of the slopes, which involves cutting down a lot of trees, clearing a lot of understory and undergrowth, putting down a sort of a mesh which is held in place by things that are called soil nails. And over time, the idea is that the existing relatively mature trees that will be allowed to remain will continue, that the canopy will be restored, that some level of understory will start again, but that there will be no danger of a slip. There has been, I think, one very minor slip in the last few years, the kind of thing that probably stops the traffic for a couple of days while somebody with a tractor shifts it, but nobody in any danger of their lives. But the council is wedded to this idea, as is the local MP. So that is the situation with Dinah's Hollow, that Dorset Council has renewed a commitment to spend something in the region of £8 million, which is a lot of money for a council that is seriously in financial trouble. Whatever the background causes of that, it is in financial difficulty. It's going to be voting a lot of cuts soon. You might ask why they would choose to do this, which is not popular. The locals are very upset about it.
So there is, I understand, a plan that the local community came up with, which would be considerably cheaper and not nearly as onerous on the vegetation of Dinah's Hollow.
Yes, the parish council took a decision to recruit a company called Red Rock, who are geological specialists, to do a report. And they have talked to the landowners, they've done loads of surveys. Incidentally, in addition to the loss of the tree canopy and the loss of understory and undergrowth and a lot of trees, maybe they're not big mature trees, but nonetheless they are trees, and anybody who's driven down it will know that, in certain lights it's a completely magical place. But there are also quite a lot of endangered creatures of one sort or another. Several red-listed birds, several species of yellow-listed birds. There are dormice, which are probably the most significant, because there are a fair few bats around, and the bats will probably rehome themselves. There's an awful lot of badgers, so it's not entirely easy to get too worked up about having to relocate a few badgers. But the dormice are serious.
They're pretty much one of the most endangered mammals in the country.
Endangered. And also not so easy to relocate. So there are all sorts of very strong reasons for objecting. Dorset Council has not covered itself in glory with this particular issue. A lot of organisations which should have been asked at least for their view, like, for example, Dorset Wildlife Trust, weren't. They obviously do have a view, and they are very concerned about the impact on biodiversity of the area, and also on the impact specifically of the various red-listed, yellow-listed and endangered species that are there.
Of course, you were going to say more about the geological survey, what suggestion they came up with to solve the problem.
Their suggestion involves much less tree felling. It does still involve a few of these soil nails, but it will be much, much less invasive, and crucially, the landowners are all in favour of their scheme. It will cost less. With the landowners in favour, it means there would not have to be compulsory purchase orders. one of the reasons why Dorset has had to allocate so much money is compulsory purchase. So the Red Rock scheme would, according to the parish council and Red Rock, I haven't read the report, so I'm being very careful not to say in any detail what it includes. I merely have what the parish chairman said at the meeting in Dorchester, and it would appear that it would save time, it would save money, it would save a great deal of angst of one sort or another. It would involve much less disruption of wildlife. At the end of it, Red Rock are confident that if there is any risk from the slopes, that it would be minimised by the work, and there is no real guarantee that the expensive, complicated, controversial and very long, in terms of how long it will take to get approval, scheme that the council has approved will actually work anyway.
So, Fanny, has this, the Red Rock proposal, which has got the local approval from what you're saying, this has been put to the council, has it, as a suitable alternative?
Well, so there was a meeting in the September meeting of Dorset Council's Strategic Planning and Technology Committee, I think that's the right name. And so I went along, and I was very surprised when I got there. There was nobody apparently there from It is within Cranbourne Chase, AONB, as most people would know. They are now called National Landscape. It is within the Cranbourne Chase National Landscape. There was nobody there from the NL. There was nobody there from Parish Council. And
had they not been invited?
No. None of the statutory consultees had been given their proper formal invitation to the meeting. They weren't there. So the meeting, which was a farce anyway, because nobody said anything. The meeting was declared null and void, so I duly reported that for the BV last month. It was consequently rescheduled for the October meeting, and I went. And this time, Richard Burden from Cranbourne Chase was there, and so was the chairman of the parish council, and Jane Somper, who is the area councillor for the Beacon Ward, but is not a member of the Strategic Planning Technology Committee. She was there. But Richard and David and I were unable to go in. We were all there in good time, so we sat around outside, and it got to 10 o'clock. And I said, well, I think we have to go in because the meeting is scheduled to start at 10 o'clock. And I think, at the very least, they're not going to want a story that says that the Senior Landscape Officer for Cranbourne Chase National Landscape, the chairman of Melbury Abbas and Cann Parish Council and a representative of the local press were ejected from a meeting. So we went in. I mean, there was no apology, but it was very clear there was something going on. Or, to be more honest, there was something not going on. There weren't many people, and somebody I know who was a councillor mouthed to me, they're not quorate. And for the purposes of your listeners, a quorum is what is required. It's the minimum number of people with the right to vote that are there. So Jane, for instance, was there, but she had no vote because she was not a member of the committee. Anyway, in the end, somebody who had been a member of the committee, isn't now, but who was there and is a member of another planning committee, was agreed to be a substitute. So about half an hour late the meeting got going. But it is very hard to credit the utter incompetence that you could have one meeting to which the statutory consultees were not even officially invited, and then the next meeting there is so little interest in this controversial and expensive scheme that nobody bothered to turn up. I think it beggars belief, but I think we can simply just write it off as utter incompetence, because I don't think there's anything malign going on. I think it's just complete and utter incompetence. Anyway, there was no debate. It just one or two people asked questions. So the long way round to answering your question is that the Red Rock report and recommendations were referred to in the parish council statement. I have no doubt they will have been forwarded to the council. My impression, and I would love to be wrong, is that it will simply sit there and gather dust in some digital archive, and they will simply carry on.
and just be quietly forgotten. Is part of the problem, Fanny, the fact that North Dorset doesn't have a representative on the council?
On the committee.
On the committee.
Yeah.
On the committee.
I don't think that helps, because even if Jane had said anything, I don't think it would have carried much weight. They are obsessed with this idea that Dinah's Hollow is potentially dangerous, which brings
Based
us...
on what evidence, though? Surely not on what happened at Beminster Tunnel.
Because of Beminster.
But you said it's different geology.
It's different geology. I'm not a geologist. I mean, let's be absolutely clear. I'm a journalist who has spent 40 years of my life, well, no, I've spent a great deal longer than that covering planning matters. I have lived up here for 40 years, and during that time I have covered Dinah's Hollow probably more than almost any other single issue. I swear I know virtually every tree and bush.
It would seem logical, though, to engage the services of a geologist, would it not?
I think the council has access to all sorts of experts, but I think they are utterly wedded to the idea. I think what people have to understand is that if something about which they have received an official warning, if they ignore a warning from their officers or official advisors and something bad happens, they lay themselves open to being sued for
they would be liable
amounts of money.
So they have to take action of some
So
kind.
they believe, most people think wrongly, but they believe, or many people think wrongly, that Dinah's Hollow represents a real threat. But that begs the question, which several people in the area have asked. Had I had any status at the meeting, I would have asked the committee, but nobody did ask the question, so I merely reported that the question was asked. If it is so dangerous, why are they leaving it so long? These last two meetings were to discuss the application to fell trees which are covered by a tree preservation order. Dinah's Hollow has a group TPO on it, and this was originally going to be over 90, now it's something over 60 trees. They're apparently the more mature, most of the best of the mature trees will not be felled, they say. But this application would normally have, I think it's 2 years. It's been extended, I think it's extended to 5 years, because the business of getting compulsory purchase orders can take a long time. If every single landowner objects to the CPO, there will be some kind of public inquiry. So you can see how this drags on.
Can be quite long drawn out.
Yes, it'll be a bit like, Macbeth looking at the kings going on to the end of time.
And thinking I must do away with them. I wanted to ask you finally, Fanny, how, given that Dorset Council back in July announced a nature emergency, and the proposed work would directly negatively impact the wildlife of Dinah's Hollow, how would they square that?
I think they would say that the risk to public safety outweighs the nature considerations, and that they have lots and lots of mitigation schemes in progress, which I'm sure include carefully carrying every single dormouse to a new home where we hope it will settle. The birds probably would find somewhere different. There's one other little tiny thing that this is just a possibility. A couple of months ago for the BVM, I interviewed an environmental artist called Gary Cook, whose latest project has been researching and painting the remnants of the rainforests. These are not tropical rainforests.
These are temperate rainforests.
These are temperate
some
rainforests.
In Wales and Scotland.
And of course the best known of all is Wistman's Wood on Dartmoor. But they're geologically, and in terms of some of the ancient trees, Gary believes that there are some remnants of ancient rainforest in North Dorset, and it is arguable that a Holloway like Dinah's Hollow, with its immensely ancient creation, might include some of those remnants. It's just an interesting thought. But the fact remains, we are talking about years before anything will happen. If this is so dangerous, why don't they do something about it now?
Fanny Charles on the controversy over what to do about Dinah's Hollow south of Shaftesbury.
Buffy Wareham is a practice nurse based in Blandford and recently achieved the most remarkable of milestones, 50 years in nursing. I caught up with her at Whitecliffe Surgery to find out a little bit more about her journey through the NHS and some of the changes she's seen. We recorded the interview during the working day at a busy surgery, so inevitably there were some noises off. Buffy, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us at the BEV podcast. And the first thing I'm going to ask you is, Buffy is an unusual name. Apart from an American TV series in the 1990s, I don't think I've heard it before. Where does that come from?
Well, I've always been called Buffy. I think older people might remember Buffy St. Marie. She was an American country singer. So people might say, oh, like Buffy St. Marie, but younger ones often say, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I don't think it was anything to do with that. I think I just got a nickname from home, and my siblings, my brother and my sister, don't have nicknames, so I was the unlucky one. But there is several members of my family do have nicknames, certainly my mother and her sisters, so it was probably I was the lucky one to get it. But it does cause a lot of chaos, certainly when I'm travelling and when you're doing official things, because of course you have to say your real name, Mary Rose, but I don't like just being called Mary, so Mary Rose is the name, like the wreck that I say. But when we travel, of course, they only want one name, so my husband is called by his middle name, so his first name's William, so when we travel we're William and Mary. So completely different aliases. But
well,
anyway.
very, very regal, I'm sure. Anyway, you've just celebrated 50 years in nursing, which is a huge achievement, and you're now the practice nurse over here in Whitecliffe Surgery in Blandford. 50 years, that's quite incredible, isn't it?
Well, it's a long time, yes. I don't know quite where it's gone, but so I started nursing when I was 18, trained in London, central London. I know that they said when we first started, what do your parents think about you being in central London? But I don't think my parents really thought much about it. But anyway, I loved my training. Sadly, the Middlesex Hospital has been demolished now, and it was amalgamated with UCL. I do keep up with a lot of my Middlesex colleagues, and we had a lovely reunion to celebrate 50 years. Just recently, and it was a very jolly occasion. I'm very proud to wear a Middlesex Hospital badge. I didn't realise what a fantastic training it probably was. I think, a lot of the training was very, not rigid, but I think it was very regimented. So, you weren't sloppy about time off and things like that. I was very proud that I never had any days off my night duty and stints, and we used to do 7 days on of 12-hour shifts then, and then we had a week off, which was actually rather nice. But I did love my training. We had lots of renowned surgeons and physicians we worked, for. So I think we didn't realise how important that was.
And this is 1974. You started in the Middlesex Hospital. Now, life in those days was different. As a society, it was different in the 70s. But I'm imagining that nursing in the 70s is probably out of all recognition from what it is now. Just give us a little bit of a flavour for what nursing was like in those early days.
Well, I think the uniforms certainly were different. We had a sort of situation where we had a small white hat. We had hats and cuffs and starched aprons to wear. We're very proud of our pale mauve student uniform and a pale belt the first year. And then the second year we had the hospital hat, which had a sort of long tail thing, and you had to make those up. And then the third year, when you passed your drugs assessment qualification, and then you could be in charge at night, you had a dark purple belt. That was your third year belt, before you then changed uniforms when you qualified into a blue and white striped uniform. And you had to wear capes if you were outside. So it was a very different feeling of nursing.
And the hierarchy, I think, was probably much more identifiable in those days, wasn't it? You had a matron, and
yes,
he or she was quite a figure.
And certainly, the sisters on the wards were powers to be, and the sister I worked for, my first ward when I was qualified, was an incredible woman, and I kept thinking, well, if I'd just nursed just like a little bit like her, I'll be fine. So she was a great example, really, I think.
After that, you moved on, didn't you, and trained as a midwife in Oxford?
Yes, I went to Oxford and trained as a midwife. I'd never done any obstetrics in my training, so it was a very big learning curve, but it was a great centre to learn that. I had a lot of good fun there and learnt a lot.
And then a spell back in St Thomas's Hospital, which is one of the big London hospitals, in A&E, which A&E in central London must be just about as sharp end as it gets, isn't it?
Well, I didn't realise that. Again, I hadn't done casualty in my trainings, and I thought, well, actually I was planning to do some travelling, but my husband slightly changed that plan. But I was planning to do, and I thought, well, if I'm a midwife and done A&E, I'd be well qualified, and that's what a lot of people did. I joined casualty. I could probably write a book alone about the things I've seen and saw and dealt with there. There was one occasion that I was on duty with one other when the Brixton riots broke out, and it was a major incident, and I had to call for help. And luckily, I was working with one of the doctors had just been working in Northern Ireland, so was very good at trauma, and he was very clear thinking about going round where all the department was heaving with people, and he'd say, get that one ready for surgery, suturing in there, dressing in there. He was amazingly clear thinking, and you have to think on your feet. But it was a great experience, and saw some pretty raw sides of life, to put it politely. And was on duty for the first London Marathon too, where people became really quite ill because they hadn't trained properly. So.
And then a school nurse. Now that must be completely different than working in A&E.
While I was in A&E, I went to King's and trained as a contraceptive and sexual health nurse. That was incredibly useful when I had my own family, and that was the thread that went through, kept my registration going. So when I left casualty, I did a year in the community as a school nurse, and did a lot of community family planning clinics as well in 2 areas in London, around Paddington area and also around southeast London, so around Lambeth, and did interesting jobs like domiciliary family planning, where you saw, people, and used to visit people in pretty poor environments. I enjoyed that.
What was the interest in sexual health? Was it just an extra string to your bow, effectively?
Well, I think when I did midwifery, we did do a bit of community, and I enjoyed the community side, and I enjoyed the contraceptive and sexual health side of it. And certainly when I was doing that training, they were sort of querying whether, chlamydia was anything to do with infertility. And that research has made a huge difference today, and of course it is. And when I actually arrived here in this surgery, and as a practice nurse, I was doing some work at Bournemouth, and I did my academic paper on improving detection of chlamydia in this surgery. So it's interesting. It's been a thread through my career, really.
We should mention you've had 4 sons of your own, and sadly, a bit of tragedy in the middle of it all. One of them passed away, I believe.
Yes, I've been very lucky to have 4 lovely boys. My eldest son, he was normal for 3 years, and then very sadly was afflicted by a very complicated sort of epilepsy. So I learnt about paediatric neurology very quickly, and it was a terrible time in my life, really. But I already had the next son, so they were close in age. The eldest one, he was having more and more fits, but anyway, eventually he did get a diagnosis when he was 3, but it did affect him, it did disable him. So I learnt a huge amount about having a disabled child. I was very conscious of the effect it was having on my other children. I went to see genetic counsellors before we had further children, but they couldn't really link anything to any problems there. And then it was unexpected. He died on our holiday, and that was a huge shock. And I, at the time, was planning to retrain as a midwife, but I couldn't do that then. But I went back, probably made myself too busy, but I went back. I went into practice nursing then in 1993. So I have been in practice nursing in where I was living in Staffordshire. We moved to Dorset when after about 4 years after he died.
And you came to this part of the world in 1997, I think, Wimborne, and you saw this job advertised. And was it sort of your dream job, or was it just something opportunistic?
Well, I had been working as a practice nurse in Staffordshire, and I was also doing some work at Stafford University that I transferred down to Bournemouth University, and I was doing the practice nurse course and got an academic qualification like that. And while I was there, I suddenly saw this job advertised, and I thought, they don't come up that often, and it was quite near, and I did have to do quite a lot of juggling of childcare with the three boys, because my husband was at that time commuting to London and leaving early and coming back very late. So it was quite tough the first few years, but I've loved the job, and I've stayed with the practice. At that stage it was Whitecliff surgery and Child Oakford surgery, and then in 2019 the practices merged, so then it's one big practice called the Blandford Group Practice now.
You've been here for 27 years then, in that case, which in itself is something of an achievement. 50 years in nursing. Any thoughts of retiring, or are you still getting up in the morning and running into work with great enthusiasm?
I still love coming to work, so that's important to say, but like everybody, I can't go on forever. I think that's probably the best thing to say. I really can't go on forever, and won't do so.
And outside you've got various interests. You've got 3 sons. One is an advanced clinical practitioner, so very much still keeping in the NHS. 4 grandchildren and lots of hobbies. Tell us about the hobbies.
Ah, yes. Well, I've always been interested in tennis, been a great love of mine, and so I played when I was young, played at school, loved going around a lot of the bigger tournaments. I was lucky when I was actually doing midwifery. I took 2 weeks holiday and I drove the players at Wimbledon, so that was quite fun. 2 years I did that, and had the bonus of sitting in the players' box when you weren't doing your shift. They liked nurses because they were used to long hours and crazy hours, but you had to know London quite well. And so I've always loved tennis. I've played tennis. I love going to watch tennis. I play regularly at a local club and have many friends that I play 2 or 3 times a week.
Final question then, Buffy, and then we'll let you get back to the all-important day job. Any advice that you would give to a teenager, maybe thinking of a career in medicine, maybe thinking of becoming a nurse or one of those sorts of roles? What would you say to them?
Well, I think you have to be interested in people, and I think you have to be kind. You know, good qualities like listening is very important. That's where I think, sadly, a lot of medicine is trying to go remote, and I think sometimes people need to see people. I do find that people like seeing a familiar face when they come into the surgery. Even I might have been here for a long time, but I think they say, "Oh, what a relief it's you." So,
as with so many jobs, it's more about relating to the people and being able to deal with them, not rather necessarily than the technical side, which of course you can learn, can't you?
I mean, I think sadly nursing, I do believe, is a very practical job, and yet certainly years ago you learnt on the job. You certainly watched people do things, and then you had to get on with it. It's very different now. You do have to certainly be capable of whatever you're doing, but you know, to get the qualifications now, you have to go to university. And my son, who's the advanced clinical practitioner, you know, he's just completed his master's. I mean, it's a much more academic job. I don't necessarily believe that you do need to be an academic whiz. I think some of the other qualities, and certainly get-on ability, is really important. And I think, going back to my outside of work, I think it's very important to try to get a life balance, you know, because it can be very stressful. I think it's very good if you've got some interests outside work, and I do. I love cooking, I love entertaining, I love going to art galleries and theatres, and my family is everything to me. And so my children, one is luckily near me. I have to travel up north to see my teacher son, and I've got a farmer son in Hereford, which is a beautiful part of the world. So I'm very lucky, and they're both all happily married, which is lovely, and I'm very lucky to have 4 gorgeous grandchildren.
Buffy, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us.
Thank you.
Buffy Wareham, 50 years in the NHS. What a wonderful achievement. And that's about all we have time for this month. So for now, it's goodbye from me, Terry Bennett.
And until next time, it's goodbye from me too, Jenny Devitt.